Is that the signal?
Yeah, that's the signal, but it's all good.
All right, we're off and running. Welcome to Wagner's Nightmare,
Welcome to Wagner's Nightmare.
the podcast, episode one, season one, episode one.
That's right.
I'm
Why don't
what?
you introduce yourself, Dan?
I'm getting to that. I'm Daniel Orsen. I play the viola, and I'm half of this project here with Pierre-Nicolas Colombat.
That's me, Pierre-Nicolas Colombat, the other half of the project, but some would say maybe more just because of how many more notes I have to play, but more on that in another episode.
Okay, that's rude. Maybe some weight should be given to the quality of the notes played.
All right, like I said,
Yes,
we'll get
so
into
this
it
is
in another episode.
All right, so this is Wagner's Nightmare. It's a tongue-in-cheek send-up to Richard Wagner, the most controversial and absurd and provocative and ridiculous and incendiary and literate and philosophical
And inspiring.
um, and inspiring of many different folks.
That's right.
A lot of inspiration came from Wagner. Of all time, composer, all that, of all time.
Well, I feel like one thing that we haven't really talked about much as this project has gone on is, like, do we like Wagner's music ourselves?
Oh yeah, that's a question I've gotten actually.
Yeah.
Um, I got a question at my pro Wagner or anti Wagner, and that's very uh, simplistic.
Well, that's
and
why we're doing
reductive
the
and-
whole project, is because pro Wagner, anti Wagner doesn't really get you very far anyway. Because if you're anti Wagner, then it's kind of like, you know, being an American saying that you're anti American. It's like, okay, you can be anti American if you want, but there's a lot of yourself that you can't just say you're anti American. I mean, it's such a part of your identity that there's so much like constant reckoning that has to be happening, and that's kind of what it's like with classical music when you have somebody like Pierre Boulez, who also is a big Wagnerite in his own way. You know, just to say like how far-reaching it is that even if you're not a Wagnerian but you're a Pierre Boulez fan, then the fact that you are in contact with Pierre Boulez aesthetically, professionally, already puts you only 1 degree of separation from some heavy-duty Wagner stuff. And then if you're pro-Wagner, then that's also another problem that we need to talk about. So being pro or anti-Wagner doesn't really, that's not really what it's about in the end. And that's why we're doing this project. Because it's something that just needs time and needs repeated passing over and needs a pretty thick and rich context to try to get at the heart of the issue.
Yeah, and you talked about classical music, but there's a lot in pop culture too that has that probably wouldn't be possible without Wagner,
Right.
or has a lot of Wagnerian influences, and the mass media culture and Wagner's relationship to that, and Wagner writing right at the cusp of that actually coming into being a thing, and his ideas and his artwork and his stories kind of being the first generation thing that mass media picked up, and
Right.
that carries over today in things like The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and the Marvel movies. There's lots of little motifs and undercurrents, and in a way these aren't just Wagnerian. They go way back into fairy tales and myths.
Mm-hmm.
But Wagner really crystallized all of that human heritage, storytelling heritage, right at the beginning of modernity,
Right.
in a way that's very impactful.
Yeah,
and
it kind of in a
also
tangent like
Westerns,
that. From that, I think about a lot like the way that how much power somebody like Arthur Schnabel or like Jacques Thibault or like these kinds of early 20th century artists had, that they had the privilege of being the first people that were recorded, and how much that weighs kind of on us. And like, what if instead Anton Rubinstein was the first person that was recorded, or what if Isaac Stern was like the first person that was ever recorded? You know, it could go either direction of
the anxiety.
Where do we start keeping the record? You know, like literally, where do we start keeping the record? And I think, like you said, Wagner is kind of at that cusp of just before we start entering a global world. Wagner is one of the biggest and most influential names. You know, we could think earlier like somebody like Handel that had like massive notoriety, but he didn't quite live in a global international world at that point. So it just, you know, how we see his music and the impact that his music ended up having is just different.
Yeah, I want to pick up on the mention of a global world, and then kind of go on a little bit into more the specifics of our project, and maybe mention a little bit of Wagner's music, because in all of this stuff about his legacy and whatever Wagner means, the actual music and what is in the operas themselves can easily get lost.
Right.
But so the globalism of Wagner, or a global multicultural world, you know, he has this deserved reputation of being a very nationalist figure.
Right.
But at the same time, he was extraordinarily cosmopolitan. He spent most of his working life outside of Germany as a political exile, and
in Basel, for instance.
Including. I can't. You know, it might have been Zurich.
Yeah. Well, the Wesendoncks, I think he met the Wesendonks in Zurich, who were some of his biggest patrons.
Yeah, I have to double check on that. It was Zurich or Basel.
Yeah, I mean, at any rate, he was a pretty itinerant guy.
Yeah, extraordinarily so. And he had, you know, this idea of, it really comes to fore in Parsifal, with this philosophy of compassion, and he hated war and militarism, and and later in his life he had this sort of mystical idea of what Germanness was, or German culture, as something that transcended the nation state of Germany that was being forged, because he was very disappointed with that.
Right.
And it's an idea that stands, well, it's very interesting and powerful, and you know, is there something universal to German music or French cooking or something that
it's funny,
the nation
you know,
can't claim?
Getting back to like the music itself, I love Wagner's music. There are parts of Wagner's music that every single time have a huge effect on me. Like the prize song in Die Meistersinger, or Träume, the song, passages from Meistersinger, the Flying Dutchman, obviously Tristan, you know, so many, you know, it's silly to kind of list them because they're so shared in how widely loved they are. But, you know, the first time that I saw the Meistersinger, I didn't know much about Wagner, and I was just floored. I thought it was one of the greatest things I'd ever seen. It was also at a time in my life, like when I was kind of discovering like just aesthetics and philosophy in general, and I was very like excited about these ideas. And this opera talks about those, like that's the subject of the opera, like aesthetics, and like the whole plot of the opera is this guy needs to write the best song in the world. And like that's the plot of the opera. And then at the end, he does write the best song in the world. And then he writes the best song in the world, and then the last like 30 minutes of the opera are like Deutschland, Deutschland, you know, like this so German, and then it just kind of ruins the whole thing for me, honestly.
It goes off the rails.
It really goes off the rails.
That's the most problematic moment, I think, in all of Wagner's operas.
And like, you know, for like over 2 hours before that, I am like 100% like I'm here for it, you know, enjoying, loving the whole thing. And then at the end, it's like, oh man, like if this, there's like in some of like there's a sports commentator that I like a lot that's like talks about the best team if the game was 15 minutes shorter. And
who is it?
It's another podcast, and it's just this funny thing, like this world that doesn't exist of like these teams that always let in late goals, And like that's their problem. They always let in late goals, and like how would the league table look if the game was like 15 minutes shorter? And that's kind of like the Meistersinger
soccer guy.
Yeah, it's a soccer thing.
Okay, wait, no, who's the sports commentator? I love sports commentators.
This is Roger Bennett from the Men in Blazers.
Roger Bennett. Yeah. All right, so there we got our international audience, soccer fans.
There you go.
There you go.
And but it's the same thing with the Meistersinger of like if this thing, what would be the greatest opera in the world if you cut off the last. If you cut off the last half hour of every opera, which opera would be the best opera in the world? And for me, Meistersinger, hands down. Unfortunately, a lot of the best stuff happens in the last half hour of other operas. But
yeah, the music is glorious in the last half hour. It's just a couple of lines.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, what exactly is Wagner's Nightmare, and what are we doing other than talking about Wagner?
Well, I feel like we covered it pretty well here. I mean, we love Wagner, and there's a lot of messed up stuff with the man that comes, and the people and his entourage. That's kind of the bigger problem, is that a lot of the times his entourage is much more problematic than the man himself.
That's true.
So,
what's our? More like our output. How can people follow us and experience the Nightmare?
Any way they want. I think
facets.
You can find us on YouTube at Wagner's Nightmare. You can find us on Instagram at Wagner Nightmare. There was an issue with the S here.
Yeah, we got canceled.
I know.
Our account was
our first step was to get
on
canceled.
It's literally we just made the account and I put up it's stupid. We're not bad people. We're not in trouble. It's just a sort of
a glitch,
fluke of technology.
The man's got us down. Is what it is.
Yeah, it's a sign.
The point is Wagner Nightmare. I think on Instagram. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook.
We're going to have a Discord soon.
We are going to have a Discord soon. That's right.
And we got this podcast. There you go.
We got this podcast.
And we play the viola and the piano.
And the piano.
So we're going to make some recordings. We're actually going to record some music that Wagner wouldn't like. And in the end of all this, there's going to be a really dope album.
It's true.
Really phenomenally awesome album.
And if you're really a diehard fan, you can come hear us in our concerts that we'll be giving throughout the next year.
Live concerts. And we have the Nightmare Verein. So if you come over to our website, wagnersnightmare.com, you'll find a way. We're going to do some in-depth writing, some essays, and making some particular tracks, some recordings that won't be on the album, but they're pertaining to different topics that Wagner wouldn't like. So to sort of sum all this up, our approach to Wagner is through subjects he didn't like. That's not to say we're for the subjects or against the subjects or against or for Wagner's take on them, but our avenue to Wagner is through things he didn't like.
That's right.
Yep. Okay. I guess that's it for episode 1.
Yeah.
Of Wagner's Nightmare.
Yeah.
All right.
We'll have
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Is that how we sign off?
That's how we'll have to sign off from now on.
All right. Auf Wiedersehen.
To be continued.